Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear and see me. My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a public services librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library, and you've joined the misinformation and the internet, or misinformation and the news. I tend to use both titles here. So welcome. We're going to get started. I want to tell you a little bit about the platform we are using. It is called GoToWebinar. You should see a little question mark. It's usually somewhere on the right-hand side of your screen. That will allow you to ask questions throughout the presentation, and feel free to do so. Just note that I am the only staff member in the room, so I'm also trying to read those questions. So if it takes me a little while to get to them, I apologize. It's just because I'm talking and it's difficult to read and talk at the same time. You also might notice that you do have access to two handouts. One of those is a list of resources. We're not going to really talk about many of those, but it's really something that you can take with you and use to explore these topics further. And then you also have a copy of the slides. I will also send you links to these in an email that will be sent to you about 24 hours after this event. So if you don't download them or what have you now, you'll have access to them later. So without further ado, we have a lot of information to cover, and hopefully we'll get through it all. If not, like I said, you will have access to this information and you're free to explore it at any time. So let's dive in. Okay, just to note that this course is based on the work of Mike Caulfield. He has created something called the SIFT method, which we're going to talk about and explore today. That's kind of going to be the basis of this particular workshop and training. This also, many of the things that we're doing today are in the Check Please starter course, which was developed by Mike Caulfield and others. Mike Caulfield, oh gosh, I should have looked at his about before the class because I'm blanking a little bit, but I believe he's with the Washington State University. He's been associated with other universities as well, and he's just a known educator, and media literacy and digital literacy are two things that he happens to focus on. So just to note that I have completely adapted this content. It's not all mine. A lot of the examples I've chosen, or ones I've chosen, they're not all necessarily his, but some of them are his as well. So just to kind of start off with defining like what misinformation is. Oh, and I'm sorry, I think I got out of my presenter view. I apologize. Here we go. Okay, I'm hoping you can see my screen well. Let me just double check. Just please do put something in there if you're not seeing my screen. It looks like you are though, so holler at me if you're not. Okay, there are First Draft News is a really reputable news organization. And they have this chart, 7 types of mis and disinformation, and misinformation being incorrect information without the intent to deceive, disinformation being incorrect information with the intent to deceive. I kind of end up using those words a little interchangeably, though they are different and distinct. So I apologize when I do that. Yeah. So why, I mean, it's not necessarily super important to memorize these or anything, but sometimes it's helpful to just kind of look at what the sort of types are just to wrap our heads around it a bit. And something that it just kind of calls to mind is like, well, why does this happen? Why is misinformation proliferating online? And really, like in a nutshell, it's because it's cheap to produce it. It's really fast to get it out there. It tends to be very repetitive. It's posted repeatedly. It's posted by one organization and then reposted by other organizations, individuals, etc. And also, it can be very difficult to correct. And we've seen that with a lot of misinformation online regarding COVID, for example. So why is this happening? I mean, there's kind of a lot of reasons, but some things just to sort of remember is that a lot of competing news outlets are responding to the pressure of getting a story out fast. So we're frequently sacrificing accuracy for speed in the news world and online in general. It pays to get clicks, it pays to get attention to your site because that helps with your marketing and ad revenue. So a lot of these news models where they're giving you free news, it's really important to them to have the latest breaking stories. So sometimes we lose accuracy in that context. But going even further than that, I mean, there's also a lot of news stories that we do want access to where we're not going to have all the facts up front. I think COVID, again, is actually a very good example of that because we only knew so much at first. We've learned more and more. The information has changed over time. So while some of that news reporting could be considered inaccurate, it was also just without a lot of facts at first. So it's a challenging thing for news organizations to kind of balance when it's important to break something and just get the info out, and when it's important to hold back just to try to release a more accurate story. Some news organizations are actually trying to hold back a little bit, which more lately because of the proliferation of misinformation online. So that's kind of interesting. Also, information overload is a real problem. How do we find the truth in a sea of information? It's really difficult. There's a lot of things being thrown at you. Further, there's kind of this blurring of the lines between, like, people have gotten really good at dressing up mis and disinformation to look like completely legitimate information. A lot of the sort of online web business models have proven that there's a lot of profit in producing forms of journalism and articles that sort of abandon standards of neutrality and rely on opinion rather than fact. They really catch people, they pull people in, and again, that's kind of what people are trying to do to work on their market and ad revenue, etc. Let me double check this question here just to make sure slide isn't the same as what you're saying. Hopefully, is that change? Are my slides advancing for people? Oh, okay. I think it pushed me out of the presentation mode again. Let me try again. And let me double check to see if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Okay. It says you're seeing what I'm seeing, but please do talk back to me again if you're finding that not to be true. Like I said, there's about 4, 5, 6 different screens I'm trying to manage here, so it gets a little confusing. So I apologize. Let me go back to what I was saying, please. And I think you should still be seeing my screen. Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So I was talking about the blurring of the lines. So this sort of abandonment of standards of neutrality, realizing that like really attention grabbing things sort of suck you in. So we're getting a lot of that too. But on top of it, digital technology makes it possible for really anyone to publish worldwide. So what ends up kind of happening is that there's a great deal of advertising, publicity, spin, and propaganda that's thrown at you every day, and it's dressed up to look very neutral. How are you going to tell the difference? Sometimes it's really hard, and I'm going to show you some examples of that today. Also, we have to overcome our own bias. Everyone is biased. There's a lot of research into this as well. It can be really difficult to see and remember the truth if it challenges our beliefs. So that kind of further compounds this issue we have of just disinformation and misinformation proliferating. At the same time, I'm really hopeful that we can be skeptics rather than cynics. We need to not indiscriminately accept what we see and hear. We do need to question what's presented to us, even if it is presented by a trusted source. But at the same time, we have to respect reputable sources, even while we ask those questions of them and probe their findings, statements, sources, etc. Like I said before, we have to realize that people, individuals, businesses, news organizations online, they want clicks. They want to bring you into their site or their platform or whatever it is. They're going to do things to manipulate you psychologically to get clicks and to stay on their site, that kind of thing, because of the ad revenue. This isn't a new tactic. It's just as advertisers in the past have spent lots of money understanding how our minds work in order to sell us more stuff. Internet companies are doing the exact same thing, but they can do it a lot more effectively because it's a lot easier to reach a lot more people. So it's just kind of interesting. What we also need to understand is that information often falls on a spectrum. Some info is not some info is definitely out there to deceive, and that falls on one side of the spectrum. But then a lot more of the info we come across is actually somewhere in the middle. Like it may just have some misinformation, it may just have some bias in it. So we're gonna look at some examples of that. So just be curious, ask questions, respect facts, evaluate sources, but we just cannot completely stop accepting every single thing um, that we see and hear. And it keeps popping me out of there. I don't know why. Here we go. And then a note that we are all biased, as I mentioned before, bias being a particular tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, opinion, especially one that is preconceived or unreasoned. A really great book on our biases is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. But in a nutshell, what they talk about is that our intuition is not really what we need when it comes to analytical critical reasoning. We need slow, deliberate thinking based in fact and reasoning. And the reason for that is because our fast thinking is full of bias, and that's great on a survival level, and that works well for us in a number of contexts. But when it comes to analyzing things, it doesn't serve us well. We have to slow down and ask questions. Just a great quote, philosopher Michael Lynch observed that the internet is both the world's best fact checker and the world's best bias confirmer, often at the same time. Ultimately, what we're going to look at a few different points is that agenda is actually a lot more important and doesn't get emphasized a lot. Um, this is particularly important in news journalism, like with news organizations. A site that clearly marks opinion columns as opinion, that employs dozens of fact checkers, hires professional reporters, takes care to be transparent about sources, methods, conflicts of interest, they're way less likely to be driven by political agenda than a site that doesn't do any of these things. And this really holds true even if the reporters themselves may have personal bias. So that's something to be on the lookout for in the places where you're consuming your news and information. And then a quick note about logical fallacies. I have got a little link to this chart here. It's just logical fallacies proliferate everywhere, and they are all over the web. Politicians use them really frequently too, I'm afraid. It's useful to sort of take a look at them. Here's just a few. I like this chart because I just think it's kind of silly. So the premise, robots should take over the world. And the blue robot says, premise accepted, please state your arguments. So here's some different kind of arguments he makes for why robots should take over the world. So if we act nice to humans now, soon they will demand constant back rubs. So that's an example of the slippery slope logical fallacy. You can see how those things don't really follow, right? Another one, robots are better leaders because of superior leadership skills. Well, that's a circular argument. That's a good example of a circular argument. So there's a lot of others on here. It's kind of fun to read it and kind of present it in a silly way. Something just to be aware of. And then the role of emotions in all of this. When we're online reading things, especially things that might challenge our beliefs or things that make us angry, we have to check that emotion. When we feel really strong emotion and that emotion pushes you to share a quote unquote fact with others, you really need to stop. Above all, those are the claims that you must fact check. And there's actually been some research on this front from a few different spots showing that this really is true. Like we tend to react and post. And one of the studies, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm afraid I'm not going to give you a good citation, but one of the studies I had read actually showed that a lot of people that were posting things on social media hadn't actually read the article. It was the headline or the little snippet that they were given that pumped them up. And what's interesting about that is like a lot of the people who write the headlines didn't actually write the articles. The headlines are intentionally written to grab. So they kind of, in a sense, they were kind of duped into just posting something that they didn't really know a lot about what they were posting. So let's get to the moves, right? Because that's the good part. So as I said, we're going to learn the moves. It's SIFT, S-I-F-T. S is for stop. I is for investigate the source. F is for find trusted coverage. And T is for trace claims, quotes, and media back to the original context. You don't necessarily need to do all 4 of these steps for any piece of information. Sometimes 1 or 2 of these steps is going to get you exactly where you need to be. The kind of searches and stuff that I'm going to show you are actually pretty quick and dirty. And the reason for that is because we're just looking for a reputable source. We're looking for a trustworthy source. We're looking for consensus. So let's dive into some of the examples, because that's really going to help illustrate all of this. So stop, we're not going to actually spend a lot of time on, because it's probably the easiest one, but also it might be the most challenging, or the one that doesn't get gets exercised the least, perhaps. Stop means we ask ourselves whether or not, I think it just popped us out again. Why are we doing that? I'm sorry, I think it keeps taking us out of the presentation, and I don't know why. I must be clicking on something. So stop. Don't read or share media until you know what it is and if it is reputable. Is it really worth sharing? Is this good information? Also, another part of stop is when you start researching something, it can be really easy to go down a rabbit hole. Sometimes stopping and taking a second to rediscover your purpose, to reevaluate, is a good idea. If you're just trying to repost something, a verification of reputability of that source is often significant. So in other words, as I said, these searches don't have to be lengthy or in great depth frequently to get a reputable good source. We have to also think carefully about what constitutes an authoritative source before we start our search. If we kind of think about what kind of information outlet am I looking to find this information from? What am I hoping to find in my search? What kind of authoritative sources would I want to find? Because once you start searching, you're going to have this really irrepressible urge to just click on the top results. Everyone does it, right? But if you can, think first of, sometimes those results are really bad, the ones that end up at the top. And we're going to look at algorithms and kind of talk about why that is a little bit. But if you can really just kind of think of what sorts of sources and information you would like to see in the results before you search, that's a good plan. And then if you don't see those kind of sites or sources in the results, fight the impulse to click on forward and reformulate your search. We are all publishers now because we have social media, and so that makes some of us actually surprisingly popular publishers of information. That means we all have the responsibility to put good information out there. If we want good information in the world and we want people to have good information in the world, we have to put it out there, right? We can't keep posting stuff that's not serving anyone well. So again, a big part of that is actually checking your emotions too, remembering to slow down, and remembering that quick reactions frequently equal quick posting, and then that equals further sharing that reaction experience with many more people. So stop is about starting with a basic question when you're looking at a piece of info, or when you're looking at a set of search results. Can you trust this info? If not, we're going on to the rest of the moves. We're just moving right on. So before we go on to the next one, which is investigate, just a note that the library actually subscribes to a lot of great content on the web, a ton of authoritative sources. You do need a library card number to use these resources from home. The web page is there. You can also find it on the library's website under collections, e-resources, so under the collections menu. We have things like access to NOLO is one of the best publishers of legal books on all kinds of very helpful, useful topics, and we have access to that. Consumer Reports, which they do not receive any payment at all from any sponsors to evaluate the products that they have. That's very unique. You can't really find a free source that does that. So really unbiased consumer information. And I could go through all of these, but we just don't have quite the time. And I would be happy to talk to you about any of these sources, or about how you might approach any kind of research you're doing, or any questions you have using these resources. So do not hesitate to get in touch with me. I will share my contact information again. It will also be emailed to you. So investigate. So we're about to really actually do some stuff. Yay. So investigate is know what you're reading before you actually read it. You don't have to do a deep investigation, but so think for this example, if you're reading a piece on economics by a Nobel Prize winning economist, or if you're watching a video on the benefits of milk consumption that's put out by the dairy industry, it's useful to know that. That's kind of the agenda thing, right? Just knowing, well, does this organization have any kind of agenda? The Nobel Prize winner may not always be right. The dairy industry may not be untrustworthy, but knowing expertise and agenda of the source is crucial to your interpretation of what they say. So taking 60 seconds to figure out where that media is from before reading it to decide if it's worth your time is a really good idea. So let's look at some examples of this. We've got a little question comment here, so I'm just great. Yeah, I've got some good comments in here, and if we have time at the end, we will definitely look at those. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. And I think I just have, okay, my example's coming up. But so I'm going to show you two websites, and we're just going to talk about, like, are these credible websites or not? Like, or just how would you determine their level of credibility? How would you check their agenda? What strategy or strategies would you use? So I'm going to show you. So this is acpeds.org. It's the American College of Pediatricians. So that's what their homepage looks like. And then this is AAP.org, the American Academy of Pediatricians. And so that's there too. So if we look at these two, like usually, like how would you decide whether or not they're credible? Like what kind of strategies would you employ? So the Stanford History, I'm actually taking this directly from a group that conducted a study using these particular websites. The Stanford History Education Group conducted a study where they had historians, Stanford students, and professional fact checkers compare both sites. Interestingly, 50% of the historians pretty much got it wrong, and then 65% of the students got it wrong. And then 100% of the professional fact checkers got it right. The fact checkers also got it right within seconds, whereas the historians and students frequently took the entire time allotted, which was 5 minutes, and they still got it wrong. So what did the professional fact checkers do that these other individuals didn't do to try to find out the agenda, et cetera, of these particular organizations? Let's look at a video and we can do that now. Here it goes. So I'm going to hit play, and what it's going to do, it's going to take you through a search I actually did earlier on and then recorded what I did. So what we're going to do, and I think that some of you are going to find this surprising, is we're going to look in Wikipedia. And Wikipedia gets a really bad rap all the time because it's user edited, but Wikipedia is actually an excellent source of really basic facts and just consensus viewpoints. Wikipedia does take some level of know-how to edit, and it's monitored by dedicated editors. So the idea that like anyone and everyone can edit it instantaneously is kind of overblown. That's not really how it works. Wikipedia articles also cite their sources, and the sources that they cite are generally pretty good because they have a really stringent idea of what makes an authoritative source. And I actually think that that's included in the resources list, is a link to what they consider are authoritative sources, and it's good. It's because the Wikipedia community has really strict rules about sourcing facts to reliable sources. Authors of these articles are also supposed to adopt a neutral point of view. They don't always, and generally that's called out at the beginning of the article, so you know to be wary. Wikipedia should always be approached with caution, especially with articles covering contentious subjects or evolving events. But it's a really invaluable resource to any fact checker when you're just trying to get the basic facts. If you're researching a complex question, also starting with the resources cited and the summaries provided by Wikipedia also can give you a really substantial running start on an issue, because they're going to have a lot of great references and external links. Like I said, not all Wikipedia articles are created equal, but a lot of them are pretty dang good. So thinking back to what I said about bias and agenda, the main, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the example. So all I'm doing here is I'm typing Wikipedia in after the name of the website. That's all I have to do to run a quick internet search. All of my searches are going to go through DuckDuckGo, just so you know. DuckDuckGo is a privacy-oriented search engine, and it also doesn't change its behavior based on your previous clicks. And I like that, and we'll talk about that later. So that's why I use it. So we're going to see these results in DuckDuckGo, which looks a little bit different than Google, if that's what you use more frequently, or Bing, or what have you. So what I'm pointing out here is that we actually find just right away the Wikipedia article. There's a snippet from it right here on the page. We don't even have to dive into the Wikipedia article, but I think I'm not sure if I do or not, but it already tells me it's considered a socially conservative advocacy group of pediatricians and other healthcare workers. But tell us more. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm sorry, I restarted it, but it's okay. It'll come right back to it. It also was started in 2002, so that's fairly new for an organization of pediatricians in America. It only has only a handful of members compared to what you would think an organization of pediatricians would have. If it's a popular, like kind of well-known National Association of Pediatricians, you would think it would probably have between 150 and 200 members. And if we actually dived into this a little bit more, this organization was set up because they opposed adoption of children by LGBTQ individuals. So that's why they started that organization. And so they're generally by this group of people, they're considered more socially conservative, and it's considered a group that was really founded on a particular issue they're wanting to advocate for. The American Academy of Pediatricians is a little different. So same thing here in the search. I'm sorry, in the address bar, typing Wikipedia after the address doesn't tell us much in that little snippet. So I actually pulled it up to look at it a little more closely. We see it as a membership of 67,000 people. It was started in 1930. It's a little bit more what I would expect from a reputable, nationally known organization of pediatricians. So there's no reason to necessarily not take information from the other organization. You just have to realize that they were set up with some kind of agenda in mind. So we need to look at that information and remember kind of they're going to have a certain agenda to promote, and this organization doesn't necessarily have that same agenda. Another way that we could look at this, so this is yet another example, because not all organizations are going to have their own Wikipedia article, and that's fine. There's other strategies we can use, and we're going to cover those. But this is just sort of another example using the Wikipedia strategy. So this is an organization called Nuclear Matters. It's as it says here, a national coalition of grassroots advocates working to inform the public and policymakers about the clear benefits of nuclear energy. So do they have any kind of agenda? What could we find out about them? We find that Wikipedia can actually tell us quite a lot. So same deal here in the address bar, just clicking at the end of the address, typing Wikipedia, hitting my enter key. It runs a search in my default search engine, which in this case is DuckDuckGo. There's an article here about nuclear matter that was right up here, and that's not what we're looking for. We don't want to know what nuclear matter is. We're looking for an organization called Nuclear Matters. In the little the description here, it tells us that the initiative it mentions this initiative called Nuclear Matters. So there's a good chance it's in this pro-nuclear movement Wikipedia article. So why does Wikipedia say it's pro-nuclear? We're actually going to find out. When we click on it, which we do here right now, what we find is a really dense article, and so it's kind of actually hard to find the mention of nuclear matters here, but we can find it by hitting control and the letter F on your keyboard in any program. Usually we'll pull up the find box and will allow you to search for a term or word on a page. So we search nuclear matter and it starts to pull it up for us. It starts to take us to one of the instances of it. Here it is. So it tells us a little bit about why this was begun, who began it, and then it also cites that as well. So we can use that citation to find out, is that a good citation? Is this legitimate information? So if we're skeptical of this in any way, we can follow back the citation and decide if we think that that's trustworthy or not. But this does kind of indicate that there's probably some kind of agenda that Nuclear Matters has. So let me check here because we've got a few comments. Great, and we'll come back to those. I just want to make sure everyone's following and I'm not leaving anyone too far behind. It doesn't look like that's the case, at least for now. Um, so lateral reading. So whenever we're investigating, a lot of what we're doing is we're looking at what other websites and resources are saying about the resources you're using. Websites often look professional. They may not have ads. They may appear as nonprofits. That's not really a sign of credibility. We need to know what are other sources saying about that source. Also, if we only investigate the About Us page, that's typically what a lot of the students and researchers did in the Stanford study, or not researchers and professors did in that study, is they would just look at the About Us page and be like, oh, okay, well, they sound more legitimate than this other group. Any website is going to make, even a credible one, is going to make itself sound really good. It's going to give a really positive About Us. So it's just not a good gauge of what's up with this group. Like, do they have an agenda? What kind of information do they post? What are they really doing? So yeah. Oh, and so I don't employ this strategy a lot, though I did do it the other day for a publisher, because I had never heard of that publisher and I was trying to find out more about it, because there's a lot of like vanity presses out there, and so I was curious. It's like, I've never heard of this, like, well, tell me more about it. So this actually worked for me recently, researching a vanity press, but it's not always the most effective search. I'm just going to warn you, it tends to be a more advanced kind of thing to do, in my opinion. But with lesser known websites, sometimes you're not going to find like a Wikipedia article. Obviously, you're not going to find many other sites talking about it. So then how do you know if it's credible or not, or if other sites are saying that it's not credible and you'd like to know that? How would you find out? Well, one way to do it is to actually do this kind of search here. So this is a search. So say you've found an article at baltimoregazette.com and you want to know, is that like a legitimate news site? Is that considered a credible news organization? Why, like, what's up with this news organization? So if we did a search for just like this, what it says here, baltimoregazette.com -site : baltimoregazette.com, what that does is it searches for the phrase baltimoregazette.com, but it's not going to search the baltimoregazette.com website for that phrase. Because oftentimes if you just did that search, you're going to find like every page of the baltimoregazette.com's website in your results. So this just excludes them from that search and shows you what other sites are saying about it. This is a defunct site and has been for quite a while, but it was set up intentionally to share out fake news and disinformation. Once it got outed as having that agenda, the people who owned it shut it down. So, and I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but it is actually profitable for people to create just fake information and put it out there, because again, like, ad and marketing revenue can be substantial if you're able to draw people to your site. And that's what a lot of these fake news sites do, is they put out really emotionally charged information and headlines that then people share. It just helps increase their ad revenue, and they profit. You can also find out who owns a site at whois.icann.org, but just a note that many people do mask their identity, and it's perfectly legitimate to do. They just do it for privacy reasons. As an individual, like, website owner, for example, I wouldn't want people to just be able to look it up and then just start calling me. So but sometimes it's interesting to do that, and sometimes people don't bother to do that, and it can really out them pretty quickly as to being the individual or organization controlling that particular website. This is maybe a pretty straightforward example, but I just wanted to mention it because I just think it gets at agenda again. So there was a passenger plane shot down by Ukrainian separatists. An investigation suggests it was hit by a Russian-made missile. Which is the better source on the downing of this passenger plane and why? So you have an article on Reuters, you have an article on RT.com. Just doing a really simple Wikipedia search. Reuters has been around a lot longer, like much longer, years and years and years longer. It has a wide circulation. It employs a lot of fact checkers, etc. RT.com is actually funded, it's a Russian state-controlled international television network funded by the federal tax budget of the Russian government. So, I mean, which is more credible here? Reuters is. I mean, RT has a ton of agenda. It's going to be really hard to get past that agenda in their reporting, right? And their funding. So here's an example. I'm going to check comments again. Great, yeah, we've got some good comments. We will get to those. I'm just making sure we're all staying up with it. So this example that we're gonna look at is focusing more on the nature of scientific research. So it's really common in news and reporting to get this leading studies or new study finds that in this case, too much coffee could lead to Alzheimer's. What if we actually want to do some lateral reading about this journal article or this new study? Because there's lots of not very legitimate journals out there. Is this journal that reported this, are they considered credible by the experts that are doing research in this field? Like what could we find out about the legitimacy of this particular article that this site is citing? Expertise is really difficult to quantify. So I'm not saying like, oh, if it's the consensus, that's your answer. We need to be aware of the consensus because that's a bunch of experts coming together and deciding that that's the consensus. So while like we've seen many times over throughout history where the consensus was not accurate, we can't disregard it. It has to be considered. So what I'm saying, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like most of the time we're really just trying to find evidence of expertise rather than trying to make a call on how much of an expert the person is. At the same time, we have to be respectful of expertise. I'm going to talk about that in a little while, but expertise generally can be professional, academic, it can be writer, reporter, it can be indigenous, it can be lived. There's a lot of different sources of expertise, but knowing more about the source may change how we interpret the data. And we're also trying to determine if the author or authors of a particular study have expertise in their topic or field. So let's look at this example here. The very first thing that I'm going to do is find the article they're sourcing. So I'm scrolling down to be like, do they link to the article? Do they tell me more about the article? Do they cite it? They take a while to bring it up, but they do tell me where it came from. It came from Nutritional Neuroscience. Okay, well, what could we find out about nutritional neuroscience, and what could we find out about the authors of this article? Now, when I click on their citation, and actually like what's kind of awesome about this article is they took me right back to the journal article. A lot of sites don't bother to do that. They're just going to take you to yet another news article reporting about the study. So this was actually really nice that they did this. The journal, again, is called Nutritional Neuroscience. Great. I'm seeing it's part of this whole publisher here called Taylor Francis Online. I'm going to go to google.com for this search. What I'm about to do is I'm about to do an impact factor search. Impact factor is something that will just show you whether or not a certain journal has any level of impact on the particular field it's associated with. It's really difficult to say that one number is better than another because impact factor numbers, whether they're good or not, really differ depending on the field. So all we're looking for is, does it have any impact factor at all? If it does, it means that some level of experts consider it an impactful journal, and they use it, they contribute to it. It's important. The thing with DuckDuckGo is it won't do impact factor searches for some reason. So I went to Google to do this search because Google will do impact factor searches. And so I'm typing it in. I could have also just copy and pasted it, but I'm going to do it the slow way and type in impact factor. It already comes up with a number. I don't really even have to complete the search at this point. It tells me what year that number got to, or what year that number was arrived at. Also, something that I didn't point out is that it also had the Wikipedia article told me a little bit about it. It told me it's peer reviewed. Generally, that's considered important in any research field, that the journal be peer reviewed. Next, I'm looking at the actual people who've written the article. I'm only going to focus on one. I don't really have time to go through all of these people. Also, it's really not necessary. An author with a lot of clout that's done a bunch of studies in this field isn't going to partner with a bunch of people that are totally unknown or just not respected in their field at all. I'm not going to look at for Kitty Pham because it so happens when I was scrolling through that article, they mentioned Kitty Pham as a PhD student. So they're just not nearly going to have as many articles. They're not really considered as much of an expert. So I'm curious about the other authors on here. Did she get people other than students to write this with her? Let's find out. So we're searching for Anwar Molugeta, and I'm probably mispronouncing that name, and I apologize. And what I'm going to do is I'm taking it to scholar.google.com. Google Scholar is a source of journal articles, and some are free to read, some are not. You do hit some paywalls, but it's a great place to just kind of search for academic level articles on any particular topic. You can also search for researchers themselves and get a fair amount of information about the kind of things that they publish and how much they've published. So I'm gonna, this time I am gonna copy and paste because I'm probably frightened of misspelling the name, and that might mess up my search. I pasted it in. And what's nice is like they actually show me right up here, he's been cited by 338 people. He's associated with University of South Australia. I see a number of things that he's published. These are all really well-known publishers of journals, like Science Direct and Biomed Central are really well-known. It doesn't look like he's exclusively done research on coffee consumption, but he has done some. So to me, it's just like this is legitimate enough to say, yeah, it seems like a pretty valid study. However, something to also consider when we're considering this particular study, just the nature of scientific research in general, which doesn't get talked about a lot in the media, but scientific knowledge is really always tentative and subject to revision should new evidence come to light. Results of scientific studies are often just a drop in the bucket. They're rarely a complete picture. We need to look at kind of the research as a whole and see which way it's leaning. News media, unfortunately, do often make the conclusions found in studies seem a little bit more conclusive than they really are. There's really no more dreaded phrase to any fact checker than a recent study says, because it's just kind of misleading, and it doesn't. A recent study being really impactful is maybe if it's huge and been done over a very long period of time. That'd be something to really like this recent study says like, whoa, what an interesting study. But a lot of the studies being cited, like this particular study that they're citing, I think only had 24 participants, if I remember correctly. It was a small data set. So we just need to consider that when evaluating any claims that people are basing on research, especially if that research is really, really new, or that research is only one study. In science, generally multiple conflicting studies will come in over periods of time. And then over time, the weight of evidence sort of ends up on one side or the other, depending on where that research points. So studies that are consistent with previous research often are a little bit more trustworthy than those that have surprising or unexpected results. Most of the time, not always, most of the time. The unfortunate effect of the press's presentation of science, and in particular science around popular issues such as health, you see the yo-yo of like chocolate's bad for you, chocolate's good for you, coffee's bad for you, coffee's good for you, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. That's not whiplash from science. That's a product of the inappropriate presentation from the press. So we really want to find high quality secondary sources that reliably summarize the research base of a certain area more often than we want to look at individual studies. That's not always true. There are some cases when you really are going to want to look at those individual studies too. It's all going to depend on the kind of research you're doing and on how new that research is. So for example, if you're someone who's like suffering from cancer and looking for new treatments, it absolutely makes sense to me that you'd be looking at more individual studies than maybe the research as a whole, because you're trying to look for the most innovative, newest treatment participants, right? So there's differing ways that that this might apply. Let's just talk just a second about expertise. I already feel like I'm way too behind, but how do we determine expertise? It's complicated. I like this this little comic. It just kind of makes me laugh, and it just feels like that's sort of how people on social media are kind of thinking sometimes about some of the things they're posting. And the guy just says, hey, looks like a group of scientists. They're in a lab of some kind. Hey, I know we have dedicated our whole lives to this, but this guy's comment on Facebook raises some interesting questions. So it's just, the idea here is that like these people have dedicated their whole lives to researching what they're researching. The idea that like they haven't considered a lot of the questions is kind of really underestimating them to a certain extent. So let's talk about expertise and what an expert is, what makes an expert. And this is from a book called The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols. This is not my original thinking or anything. So what is an expert? An expert is someone who has mastered a skill or body of knowledge. They tend to practice that skill or that knowledge. It's usually their main occupation in life, but not always, but it frequently is. They are considered someone who knows more on the subject than a typical person, than maybe sometimes like anybody in a wide geographic area sometimes. There's someone who generally we would turn to for advice and knowledge on that particular topic. And there can also be experts to experts. For example, a more experienced doctor or professional that specializes in a subject rather than a generalist or other specialty not related to the topic that's being investigated or talked about, for example. So like COVID is just such a ripe example, but COVID, for example, there were a lot of people like being like, oh, well, this guy says, this guy says, this guy says. And then if you looked at their credentials, it was like someone who's never ever done anything related to infectious diseases or things like that. So just the idea that like just your general primary care doctor is going to be more of an expert on COVID than someone who's studying it as a career, that just doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? So what makes an expert? Generally, it can be a lot of things. It can be a combination of things. Education frequently does. Talent. It can be a big part of it. Experience, someone who's continuing to improve their skills, learn from mistakes, has a visible track record, that really helps. And peer affirmation, acceptance of by others. Someone who's also maybe done various tests and things and earned various credentials, like they're on certain boards or they're part of certain organizations where you have to actually do some credentials to be part of that organization. So let's look at like how we might try to determine whether or not someone is an expert. Again, these are quick and dirty searches. We're not getting into a lot of depth, but these are two different people that were called experts at different times. Nils Bildt was called an expert for the Swedish Defense and he was called a Swedish Defense and National Security Advisor. He's supposed to be an expert on that. And then this is a totally separate topic, separate news article that I found. Randall Aki, and he's supposedly an expert on studies related to household income that he's done. So how would we determine like which of are these both experts? Like how would we find that out? I'm doing two of them because the search comes out a little bit differently. We start with Nils Bildt, and I'm doing the exact same thing I did earlier. Wikipedia. What do we got? Does Wikipedia have anything? Let's see. And what we're essentially going to find out is no, not for this particular individual. We do find a gentleman named Nils Bildt, but he's actually a former prime minister, former prime minister of Sweden, and obviously not the person we were looking for. If the Nils Bildt on Fox were a former Swedish prime minister, they definitely would have told us that. So Nils Bildt Sweden was something else I had tried. I was like, well, let's see if maybe we can get him that way. And what's interesting is like I didn't, because I could have gone to a site like Google News, for example, and maybe looked for him there to see like, is he cited as an expert by other news outlets, like, or something like that, like, and see where else his expertise is used. That might be interesting. But like, I didn't even have to do that. I just did this general search of Sweden. And then I start to get a lot of people who are like, hey, who is this guy? And in fact, like Fox actually distanced themselves from this guy too, because he's actually not, Sweden itself was like, we don't know who this guy is or why he'd be considered a security advisor, etc. So he wasn't really an expert. That wasn't, and I don't think he should have been given that particular title based on what they did find out about him. And then, gosh, I kind of went and messed up my little. Oh, and then I flip around, I click on some of the links to like read more. I hit a paywall, but I mean, these are all considered like legitimate news organizations. And then I think there was at one point even something from Fox itself that talked about him as well as not really being the right person to have been chosen to be an expert in that context. So what about Randall Ackey? Fortunately, the people we've chosen here have really distinct names, so that helps a lot. But Randall Ackey, he didn't have a Wikipedia page either, which is, of course, the way I started. I do see he looks like he's associated with UCLA. We also saw that from the article that I found his name in. I did another search just for his name because he is such a good distinct name. Looks like he's associated with the Brookings Institution. And I also find that he's listed in Google Scholar. I could have actually just clicked right there. Instead, say that wasn't one of the results, I could just add Scholar to my search. And it actually takes me to this really nice page that shows me all of his citations, what articles of his have been most cited, what journals they've appeared in. So this gives me a lot of information about this person's level of expertise. So this to me seems more like an expert. Like I would feel comfortable saying this guy is an expert. Again, it doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that what they're saying you don't have a lot of questions about or problems with, right? But it means that we can probably safely say this is an expert and move on. So let's go to find trusted coverage. So we did investigate, we're on find trusted coverage. So finding trusted coverage is when you actually care about the claim an article is making and you want to know if it's true or false. Your best strategy really is to try to find trusted coverage about it. So sometimes you might see something and you're like, I know this isn't a good I know this isn't a good website, but is this true? So that's kind of one thing that might come up. Or say that like you just see something with absolutely no sources at all, but you're like, well, is that true though? Like, how would I find out? I have no way of checking your source. So now you're wanting to kind of dive in and find out what's going on. So let's take a look at some examples. And right before we do, I'm not going to spend, I might even just skip this, but we'll do it really quick just to kind of show you what some Google searches look like a lot. I'm sure you're familiar, but I just want to point out a few things. This is a very generic search and is maybe not the best search terms to use. But in the past, when you used to do the search, Google actually finally changed this. But it was like this for a long time. If you did this search, you got this little snippet from Google, and what they kind of pull this out because they've decided that this is one of the best responses to this particular query. And there's a number of reasons why they've decided that. We'll talk about that in a second. But what they've actually pulled here is something from heritage.org, which is it's a right-wing think tank. It's considered right-wing by pretty much everybody. It's funded really largely by the Koch brothers, who are actually very loudly anti-union. So this is a very agendaed kind of response to this query. So I was just kind of intrigued that this came up. And this happens a lot. There's a lot of examples of this where Google just gives kind of a really bad answer to a query. I don't know, why are we kicking me out again? I don't know why it keeps doing that. Sorry. And then so you can see some really interesting ones. Like, for example, like you used to be able to ask Google, like, which presidents were in the Ku Klux Klan, and it would list out six different presidents. But there is no historical evidence that any of our presidents were affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan. I think the closest they can get to any evidence is that one president had a brother. That's like as close as they can get to saying anything like that. So it's not true. There's no historical accuracy to that. Yet it was pulled out as a popular answer because it was something that the algorithm was picking up. So just like any search engine, this search engine is using some kind of algorithm, a procedure or set of instructions that basically tell the search engine what to show you when you search for individual things. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but there's a lot of reasons that erroneous biased and other kind of info with an agenda can kind of end up way at the top of Google results. And part of that is because Google's algorithm is intellectual property. We only know so much about it. We know what we know about it largely comes from using it. A lot of people spend a lot of time on this to try to understand Google's algorithm and use it to their advantage. So Google's algorithms often weight information that seems popular. So in other words, it has many sites that link to it, or it gets clicked on a lot. But then there's also this other thing called search engine optimization, SEO, in which people and groups do things to their website or the metadata of their website to make it appear higher up in search results. I'm going to talk a little bit more about algorithms if we have time, but I just think we need to probably go forward, for the sake of time. So and this also is just pointing out like what the title of a web page looks like. This is generally how search engines will display information, the URL or the web address, and then a little snippet from the web page. I am going to skip over that, but this is just a quick thing just to show you, like, if we were to add to this search, just this little phrase here, site:/.edu, what that would do is it would only pull up results from the .edu domain, and the .edu domain, so sites like OregonState.edu, for example, those are only for colleges and universities. So the .edu might get us some more academically skewed results. Also, it can lead us interesting places too, because a lot of students have their own web pages on .edus and things like that. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to get great info. You still have to look at the source and stuff. So for example, like there's an example that I think was used in the Check Please, where he did a search like this, and it was related to like gun control, and it pulled up an article on Duke University's site that was actually pinned by the National Rifle Association. They have an agenda for less gun control. So I mean, and that's fine, but if you don't know that agenda and you're just like, oh, this is an educational institution, this is their opinion, it's a little different than realizing this is the NRA's opinion, right? Yeah, so let's see. So we talked about algorithms have bias just as people do. You can actually read a lot about this in the resources that I included. So take a look at that resource list if you have time. There's even an article from a gentleman, I think his name is Joey Ito, and he runs the MIT Innovation Lab or something like that. But he's just a lot of people that develop algorithms and are really involved in technology have talked about this, that algorithms have bias just as people do, and it's because people create algorithms. And there are kind of endless examples of this that I don't have a lot of time for, but it's just a thing you need to sort of be aware of, that these algorithms aren't necessarily showing you, the search engines aren't necessarily showing you like the best possible information that's most credible right at the top of your search, right? And there's search engine optimization further compounds this. I mentioned that. And there's also things like filter bubbles. And so filter bubble is just when you kind of get stuck in this bubble of like only left-leaning information, only right-leaning information, because that's the only kind of information that you engage with on a particular platform. So if you're using Google all the time and you're logged into your Google account when you use it, Google starts to learn about you. And they're like, oh, okay, well, obviously this person likes right-leaning stuff. And so they start to only show you that stuff. And so you kind of just get stuck in this bubble where you're in an echo chamber, really. It just echoes back and forth the same information, rather than kind of hearing anything that might challenge you. And it goes both ways. Confirmation bias, and that's just sort of the nature of people to, how should I phrase this? And so sometimes bad answers are the result of asking questions in ways that tap into the language or concerns of like pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, or more fringe beliefs. So the way that we word things actually matters a lot, and it reflects sort of a confirmation bias frequently, the way we phrase things. So I'll show you some examples here in a second. But this is sort of why we try to focus on finding trusted coverage rather than just any coverage. We don't know what our search engine might be throwing at us, so we try to find the trusted coverage. So here's just an example of confirmation bias. I have a lot of examples, but we don't have time for them all. But so if I think you can still do this search. The thing with search engines is they're changing constantly. The algorithms are changing, the information on the web is changing, so it's really hard to like always have a it might be hard to recreate some of what I've done today because it changes. But in the past, when you searched Google for MSG sensitivity, you got this little snippet from Healthline. Healthline is generally considered a pretty legitimate health website. All the articles are checked by MDs and written by health professionals and that kind of thing, and they tell you really clearly what date they were written. It's actually a pretty good site. But this kind of tells you like what issues can come with MSG sensitivity. So if we did a different search though, MSG dangers, we get a totally different response, and MSG sounds really frightening, right? And the reason for that is because at least in Western medicine, MSG isn't considered dangerous. There are no MSG dangers, but you might be sensitive to MSG and have symptoms of sensitivity. But there is no proof, there is no research or proof of any kind that it causes brain damage, Alzheimer's, kind of like how this MSG dangers site is saying. And then what we find is actually the person who is associated with this particular site has been warned by the FDA many, many times to stop making false claims. So I'm not saying that everything on this site is not credible. It's not necessarily what's true, but we do have to kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at this particular information or articles on this particular site. So here's just some guides to avoiding confirmation bias in searches. I'm going to skip over going over all of these examples just because I don't have a lot of time to do that, and I'd rather us see some examples. But it's really easy to lead a search engine to say exactly what you would like it to say, just with your terms. One really quick example, if we search for this phrase, women make 72 cents on the dollar, we're going to get a lot of stuff that says that. If we search for women 80 cents on the dollar, we're going to get a lot of search results that say that that's what's going on. But if we search for wage gap, we're going to get a lot of different information. So it's just thinking about what kind of terminology are you using. Sometimes just using culturally loaded terms it can really get you into trouble, the term black on white crime. That's a term that's actually used by white supremacist groups. It's not a term used by sociologists. If you put that term into the Google search bar, you're going to get a lot of sites that carry the perspective of white supremacist sites. They're not going to be great sources. I mean, they're going to be lousy sources of serious sociological analysis, right? So it's just something to think about. I do this all the time, scan results for better terms. Sometimes I just don't know the right thing to search, and it's just whatever phrase someone has given me, that's what I search. But then I'll look at kind of the little paragraphs that describe each page and sort of see, well, how are they so in other words, and they'll use a different phrase. I'm like, oh, maybe that phrase is going to get me better results, and I'll try that instead. So let's look at another fact check, because those are fun. And we want to find the source or we want to find a good source of this particular claim. So how could we fact check this? So a rat dies after gorging on cash while stuck in an ATM, and this happened in India. So is this true? Yes or no? So what we could do is we could follow, this is a tweet from Twitter. We could go to, it's mandatory.com, it looks like is where this comes from. We could go to mandatory.com and try to or read more about mandatory.com, do a Wikipedia search and try to find out more about this source. But if I'm going to tell you right now, if we did that, it'd be kind of a waste of our time. Not many people know a lot about mandatory.com. So what would be another way that we could try to validate or invalidate this particular claim? And also, if we wanted to share this story, and if it's true, could we find a better source to share? And that's just that people are kind of more automatically like, okay, this is a news site, this obviously is not satire or just something silly on the internet, right? So let's do that here in this example. So I'm just gonna start with news.google.com. And the reason that I'm gonna do that is because it's going to allow me to search a lot of different news outlets all at once. And so if a lot of news outlets reported this story right there, that's good. That's a good sign that it really happened. I don't think we really need to dig much further than that. If we're not seeing a bunch of illegitimate sites or sites that we know nothing about posting it, and we see a lot of sites that we've heard of and can recognize, that's a pretty good sign. So let's do a kind of a search. I think I did rat ATM India. What do we get? And we get a lot of good sources that this happened. We get Reuters, ABC News, New York Daily News. I don't know a lot about that one. Thrillist, okay. Hindustan Times, I don't know a lot about that, but India Today. So we could read, if we were really still skeptical, we could read more about Hindustan Times, India Today, etc. Google News isn't perfect. I mean, some of the outlets and articles that come up are not going to be reputable. So like I said, if you are unsure of any of the sources, just do a little bit of lateral reading, which we just learned about. Wikipedia, see what other sites are saying about it. Another reason we wouldn't just go to mandatory.com where the tweet has linked us to is because if a story like this was true, we would see it at multiple outlets, right? Which we did. And that's because another big part of this too is so many news outlets rely on re-reporting articles. You'll find this a lot. It's more ideal frequently to get a story from a news source that has a verification process in place rather than just some random site. And social media is really all about re-reporting. People reshare items of interest. Many are not bothering to share the best source on the topic, often just the one that's most viral. So by fact checking, we have a better story to share with others if the claim is true. So if you find a better story on that subject, let's share that instead. And then just to further talk about this example, because I've had people kind of get hung up on this sometimes, a lot of people get hung up on whether something could possibly be false, and it's really good for you to be suspicious. I don't want you to not be suspicious, but again, I want you to be a skeptic and not a cynic. Please remember that difference. So let's say, like, we can imagine someone broke into an ATM, they stole some money, they shredded the rest, then they threw a dead rat in to take the blame. Right? Maybe we could believe that. Maybe that's true. That could have happened. That sounds crazy, but is it all that much crazier than a rat eating the money? Maybe not. But at the same time, we're 13,000 miles away from the scene of this incident. We haven't reviewed any of the evidence directly, nor do we really have the ability to do it. There are many police and reporters out there with insight and skills that we don't have, and the bank and the reporters involved in this article seem to agree on what happened. So it's most likely that a rat really ate that money. But if new evidence emerges, we could definitely change our minds, right? Okay, and so this is just kind of another example on that. This is a search. So what if we did a search just for ivermectin? Say we've heard about it. I think we've all heard about it. We're curious. We want to know more about ivermectin. So we could definitely just do a search for it and see what kinds of things we pull up. And what we actually find with a search like this is we pull up a lot of really interesting articles. We pull something up about the FDA or from the FDA. I don't really dive into these questions. I don't think we pull up the knowledge bar, and it's from something called First Data Bank, which I don't know anything about, but that could be legit. We could do some research. Pulls up some news articles. This BBC article might be interesting. Brings up some journals. That could be a legitimate journal. There's a lot of decent stuff here. An article from Forbes. That would be worth checking out. Article from NY Times would be worth checking out. So that's actually some pretty decent results. But why is this really, to me, that though, like, why approach a topic that's so well known as if no one's ever approached this topic before? There's tons of people that have been doing a lot of research into what's going on here with this, why it's getting talked about so much, if the claims that have been made about it are true or false, what evidence there is to support various claims. So if we actually did a search for this term and just put fact check after it, we actually get a bunch of bases that are kind of summing up what we know so far, and they date themselves, so we can see, like, for example, that one up there was September 16, 2021, but that's still pretty new. But we can get all of these different fact checks about how effective it is in treatment of COVID-19. We can find a lot of information about it all in one place. And the great thing about a fact check is you don't have to agree with what the fact checker's conclusion was. What's great about a fact check is they give you their process. If they didn't, that's not a good fact check. Move on. Like, if they should tell you exactly what information they looked at, why they came to the conclusion that they came. And then they provide you links and information that then you can follow back and make a decision yourself on whether or not you agree with that fact check, right? And so that's pretty amazing. Like, that is why fact checking is so valuable. It really is process over whatever decision they make, because some of them are considered skewed more left than right, more right than left. And so that's something to be aware of. These fact checkers have bias too. Every single person does. We're not without it. But again, it's asking those questions of like, do they have a good process in place to sort of check on that bias? And then, as I said before, we don't have to agree with their conclusions, but their process is valuable. Here are just a sample of reputable fact-checking sites. There's a lot of them. As I said, this is just a sample. These are also on that resources list for you. Evaluating news sources, just a quick note that there are newspapers that are considered newspapers of record. They're generally considered rigorous, showing attention to detail, and they have accountability in their editorial processes. They truly have a national view, and they attempt to be the best possible record of what happened in the nation, not just a region on a given day. So this is only a select handful of papers. There are a number of them, though, that can count as newspapers of record. This is just meant to be a starting point. I am not insisting that any of these are more newspapers of record than others, and all of them do have some bias. But when we're usually talking about bias, we're talking about bias in the opinion part, in the analysis part. The reporting of the facts, there shouldn't be any bias. That should be fact reporting, right? And we're actually going to look at a bias chart here in a second, if you're curious about that. But just here is an example of some newspapers of record. Here is that media bias chart I promised you. So that, yes, definitely some organizations skew in their reporting right or left. But if we call something centrist, it generally means that their fact checking doesn't have any left or right leaning to it. And most of the time we're talking about the opinion when we're talking about bias. Just a quick note that there are a lot of bogus local news sites out there. Many fake news sites are making themselves appear to be local news sites because they know that there's a lot of trust in local news sites. They tend to plagiarize legitimate news in order to monetize it. So sometimes they have a lot of great legitimate content and then a lot of deliberate misinformation and false claims and biased info. So that's why it's always just a good practice to not say, oh, okay, this article from the Sacramento Bee is totally legit and I'm going to post it. It's a good idea to just do a quick Wikipedia search on the Sacramento Bee. And what you can get from Wikipedia is the age of the paper, the circulation size, actually a lot of really great little facts about it that kind of give you a sense of whether or not this is like a long-standing and known local news organization that's considered legitimate. So let's do some examples where we use some reverse image searching, and that might be where we end up having to stop because I want to make sure. Let me check the questions and see. It looks like we've got a lot of comments, and we can maybe get to those, but I'm trying to focus on questions and getting out this content. So let's keep going. So reverse image searching is a really handy thing to learn. Let's do an example. So the question here is this image real? What do you think? It certainly doesn't look real, but can we find out if it is? We can. So what I'm doing is I clicked with my right mouse button and I hit search Google for image. And doing that is going to run a search just based on this image. It's going to search for this image on the web. Oh, and so what I did there is, interestingly, when you do reverse image searches, it automatically puts kind of weird search terms in here sometimes. And those search terms can really throw off your overall search. So a quick handy thing to note is that if you just delete the words in there and put photo or picture or image, that tends to help and not skew your results kind of all weird. And then a note about the way the reverse image search works, it doesn't actually start showing you the pages that include your image until kind of far down on the page. So you got to scroll a bit. And what we see is we actually see a fact check on this image. This image went around a lot because people just didn't believe it was real. And they just point out this image is not photoshopped. NPR checked on it. A few other Business Insider checked on it. So a few different places. And you can also just, if you don't believe them, you can kind of read how they figured out whether or not. But this is actually from some kind of toxic spill that happened in Hungary, and it is absolutely real. Just a note that if for some reason when you right click on an image, if you're not given the option to search, which some browsers might not, you can always copy and paste the URL of the image. So what I did there is I right clicked on the image. I chose the selection open image in new tab. That was one of my options when I right clicked. It takes me to this whole new link with just the image on it. I copy the URL here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it into Google Images. So I right clicked on the URL, I copied it, I go to Google Images, I hit the little camera thing, and then I pasted the image URL and hit search. Again, I get weird phrasing up here. I take it out. I scroll down. I get the same results. So if you don't have that reverse search in your right click, you can still do it. This is just another reverse search, so I'm going to skip it. But this is just a really, really common thing that happens. Photos and photos in particular are often taken out of context or totally photoshopped like all the time. So if this is an example where supposedly George Clooney wore the shirt, he didn't. The shirt was actually just plain black, and then people put that phrasing on the shirt. So it's just photoshopped, and if you right click on it, you get back to the original and do a reverse image search, you get back to the original photo. It's just something to note that like images in particular are really easy to manipulate and to strip of all context as well. So it can be a little more difficult to know how legitimate they are. So I'm going to skip this particular example because I want us to get to trace. So trace, the web often strips information of its context, and in order to understand if something's accurately being portrayed, we have to find that context. So this means tracing claims, quotes, and media back to the original context, right? And this happens a lot because of the re-reporting that I mentioned, which happens all the time. This is a pretty decent example, so let's go through it. So this tweet here, it said, the guy says it might be time to ditch the sunscreen. He posts this article from moms.com. Is that true? Do we need to ditch the sunscreen according to these particular experts? Is that what this article says? And what we really find out is not really. So the first thing that we do is actually just click back to the article to see like, well, what's it citing? Is it going to link us back to the study that says that we should be wary of sunscreen at this point? And we do find, yeah, it does link to something that says it's published in JAMA, which JAMA is considered really well known, but it doesn't take us to the JAMA article. It takes us to something on CNN Health. And then if we actually examine this article a bit, what we find is that it actually doesn't say that. It says that the experts in this article still said you need to keep wearing sunscreen and that there's no reason to stop. You know, this might be the study that only had 24 people. I think I said another one did earlier, but I think this was the one that only had 24 people. It's a small sample size. I actually, the CNN article linked me to the JAMA article, so you can read a little bit more about it if you're still wary. It is a really interesting finding. What does that mean? And basically what they're saying is they don't know what it means yet, but experts still think you should wear sunscreen all the time. So no, it wasn't really saying you should ditch the sunscreen. So it's just a reminder to like kind of remember that like people are totally taking what they got out of it and putting it there for you. And if you didn't bother to read it, maybe you wouldn't take home the same thing. Maybe you would take home the exact same thing that guy did and be like, I'm not wearing sunscreen anymore. But that's not what the experts are telling you to do. And we at least know that. This is just a good example of context being a really good example of context being stripped. So did this in RACO and Vice President really say this? What we're going to find out is yes, but it had a really specific context, which is meaningful. So what I'm going to do is actually just search for the quote. And if you put anything in quotes, it's going to search for that exact phrase rather than just all of the words somewhere scattered about the page. So we're just using some of his own quote or some of the quote that that organization used to say he said that. And I threw his name in there too, and because we believe in absolutely gun-free, a lot of people maybe could have said something like that. And we actually get a fact check right away from PolitiFact, from Snopes. So that's interesting. So what do they say? I mean, really, like all I was looking for is like, where did he say this? And if we had actually read through that fact check, what we would find is they were saying like, yeah, he said it, but he actually said it at a really specific time. He said it after the Columbine high school shootings in '99. So it was a time when a lot of people were very emotional about this happening in our schools, and it was really surprising that this happened. It was kind of when it wasn't as much of a trend. Um, so really, like, we probably could have moved on just reading the PolitiFact, but say that we don't like PolitiFact for some reason. We're like, I want to see this for myself. What did he really say? Where are you saying he said it? They link us directly to C-SPAN to where he said this. So this is the National Rifle Association convention in '99. We have to sit through an ad for a second. Eventually, let's just skip it. And what's pretty amazing about where they linked us is they linked us exactly to where he says it. So they put us 38 minutes in, the transcript's right here. Even if they didn't do that though, we could have just searched the transcript, which is what's pretty nice about C-SPAN. But then we can actually even go to the transcript and see the quote. So yeah, he said that for sure, but he also was saying it at a really emotionally charged time. It's possible he's changed his mind when the folks who use that particular quote to kind of throw it in his face and the NRA's face, like, hey, look what he said. It was actually years and years later when they were posting that quote. So they really did take all context out of that and were like, look what this guy said, to sort of really be shocking and kind of sway people one way or the other. So it's just something to know. Context means everything all the time. We're going to skip statistics, graphs, and infographics. We're going to skip this little part. I feel like I never end up getting to this, so maybe I should delete it, but it is just so important because it's really easy to manipulate statistics in general, and then in the display of those statistics, it's really easy to manipulate that too. The two on the I think it'd be your right-hand side are just examples of just some not really good or meaningful charts, and they kind of show a lot of differentiation where there isn't a lot. And then the one on the left being just a lot better. I mean, it really well cites itself. It links right back to it. And then the chart to me is just a lot more, it's a lot clearer to see what's going on. And those gaps seem a lot more meaningful than the gaps displayed on the right. The talk that's mentioned in your resources list it's from Mona Chalabi about statistics, and that is what this whole slide and part of the presentation is based on. So I encourage you to please listen to the Mona Chalabi talk. She raises a lot of good points about statistics, what we're looking for in them, what makes a bad statistic, and why statistics can be so controversial. I was going to talk a little bit about Twitter, but I think I might skip that for now. Just to note that people can very easily post fake screenshots showing that a certain person tweeted something. So like obviously Barack Obama didn't say this, but it's really easy for me to make him say anything I want him to say on Twitter. It's easy for anyone to do this. Took me 2 seconds. So you really do need to, but when you see a tweet just kind of removed, it is helpful to see like, are other organizations talking about this tweet, especially if it was particularly controversial or notable. And you can also check Twitter as well. If you're a Twitter user, search for the tweet, make sure it exists. Just to note that public figures of many different kinds do get verified Twitter accounts. People sometimes don't realize that. So like Jack Kimball there on the right is not actually a congressman from California's 54th district. He's not a verified account. There is no 54th district in California. I actually don't think that that profile exists anymore because people figured it out. So just to note, the one on the left, Jason Chaffetz, he's done a lot of different roles. I don't think he's a congressman anymore, but that's just an example of what a verified account looks like. It has that little blue with a white check next to the name. We're going to skip this one, but if you have time for it at some point, it might be good to look at, pardon me. And this is just another example of images and videos out of context. The tweet showing the March for Democracy in Iran. It's not showing that, I forget what the country is. It's showing something totally different from a totally different year. So like I said, it's really easy to be like, here's this video of this. Okay, well, how do we know that if they're not linking back to some kind of reputable source showing us what this is? So totally not what it says it is. Same with the right, that ended up being a compilation of videos from other countries, largely from Russia. Some of it was from the US, but they were actually engaging in a very legitimate and known way of handling ballots. So it's just something to note, and you can really easily debunk these with the searches below. So these were the searches done to debunk these two particular issues. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. I want to at least give us a few minutes to see if anyone has some questions that we can cover. Deep fakes are something worth noting. That article there, I was actually going to show you a deep fake, but I really don't need to for you to understand what it is at this point, I don't think. If you do want to know more, you can follow this link from the slides I've provided in your handouts, and you can watch it and that article actually tells you ways to kind of look out for deep fakes. But deep fakes are challenging, and they're definitely gonna continue to cause challenges for information and fact checking. So just sort of recontextualizing, summing up, all of the moves are about getting the necessary context to read, view, or listen effectively, and doing that first. And the moves reestablish the context the web strips away, which really allows for a better engagement with all digital information. And then a summary of the strategies. Some of these I kind of talked about more than others, but intentionally read sources across the political spectrum and all across. Like we really need to be reading more and trying not to get down too many rabbit holes or bubbles. Challenging our beliefs is one of the best things that we can really all be doing. Consult multiple sources. Don't just rely on one source for whatever fact you're interested in or wanting to share. Check facts and/or quotes before sharing. Quotes in particular are really easy to pull out of context and are misattributed constantly. That's a really, really big one, is the misattribution that you see all the time. Critically evaluate sources. So read laterally. Often that's what you're doing there, is reading laterally. Recognize that you have biases and others do, the people you're reading information from. Don't make yourself an easy target. So that would be by trying to avoid filter bubbles where you can. That means maybe challenging yourself to click a little bit outside of your box, so you're seeing more diverse information. And just always, if you have any doubts, please don't share it. That's really where a lot of this comes from. There are definitely a lot of deliberate dis and misinformation actors out there. I can point you to so many different news articles that have covered some of these people and done exposés on why they do it and how much money they make from it and things like that. But it really, a lot of this happens just from things going viral and people sharing and resharing. So let's try to keep information like that out of there and put good information in these spaces. So thank you so much for your time. I can try to take a few questions if we have time. I don't really have time to just like comment on your comments. I'm afraid it's not really a discussion. It's more of just trying to show you some strategies that we at the library recommend for finding the most authoritative information possible. In my email follow-up, I will include something from newsliteracy.org. It's actually specifically for educators, but it really highlights a lot of the issues that are happening in journalism and news reporting and fact reporting, and why it's becoming so complicated, and why it's complicated to try to correct that information, and how sometimes corrections actually just lead to more misinformation. So it's just really interesting. People are really trying to figure this out as to how do we get good information out there? How do we share good information? So let's see. So I'm gonna start at the beginning. Oh gosh, I definitely missed some things. Thanks for your patience while I kind of look through this. Trouble with consensus is that it is often agenda driven. Maybe. I don't know that it always is, but I mean, consensus can be problematic too. And I'm not saying that consensus is always the best, but consensus is sometimes all we have. And so we can't disregard it completely. It has to be looked at. It has to be contended with. We've seen where it hasn't gone well a lot with consensus, but it's also consensus has gone really well for us too, and helped us develop a lot of things in modern medicine and modern science. So it is complicated. I agree, absolutely. All the facts. So the question is, did these fact checkers check all the resources in 5 minutes? So that was about the little kind of fact checking study I showed you. All the fact checkers did was check Wikipedia. They did it in seconds. They did exactly what I showed you, and they were just like, this one's more credible. The other one has kind of a social conservative bias and is not and has a very, very low membership and is a really new organization. So it just doesn't, while it's not, that doesn't, I'm not saying like that site is not credible. That makes it less credible than the other one, based on what we found. So that's what was kind of interesting, is the fact checkers like did it super fast. It was kind of amazing. And they did it in a way that I think a lot of people would like kind of thumb their noses and be like, you checked Wikipedia, but like actually that ends up being a valuable strategy if we just remember all the caveats associated with Wikipedia and use what we know to be the better information from it, which is the citations, the really basic stats and facts that they report, rather than kind of any opinion or analysis that an article might try to do, where that could be a little more iffy. I mean, that is a good point. Someone just said our news agency is really independent. Their journalistic efforts now have to make money, so it can be biased based on their funding. I mean, it's true, like that is why agenda is important. But I mean, a good news organization should be trying to get past all of that. But it is really complicated. I'm not going to say that it's not. I do think some news organizations really do strive for independence, but I do think that association, them needing money, them being associated with different advertisers, that causes issues too. But all of the staff involved, like the fact checkers, the marking things as opinion pieces, making corrections, and then noting those corrections really obviously, like that all lends itself to an organization trying to strive for independence and accuracy. And generally, people who get involved in journalism are very interested in that. And people that dedicate their lives to journalism generally aren't interested in just being shills for a certain company, right? That's my experience with the folks that I know that are involved in journalism. Please note that Google is highly influenced by its funding, advertising. It is. It absolutely is. It's doing a lot of marketing. Let's see. And it looks like that individual with so many comments has left. And I don't see any other questions. I did go a little bit over. Thanks for your patience if you're still here with me today. If you have any questions at all that you just didn't want to ask here or that you have later, contact me. I've given you my contact information in a number of different ways. Never hesitate to get in touch. I'm happy to continue these conversations with you. I'm happy to answer any further questions. I'm happy to help you get through any research issues that you have, or help you start a research project. Yes, thank you, Ruby. And this is recorded. I have recorded this, and I am going to share the recording with every single person that was registered for this event. So you will get a link to the recording. And then our staff will actually caption it at some point, and we will also share it on our YouTube page. It takes a little bit longer to do that, but probably within the next few weeks, you'll also see it on the library's YouTube channel, and can share it even further, or share the link I send you to others as well. That's absolutely fine. So I really hope that you got something out of this. It's a really big topic to cover. Sometimes I feel like I should do like multiple sessions for this, and maybe I should someday, and that'll be a way we can do it. I don't know if you know, I'll share some quick exciting news that the Corvallis Library has been working on building new study rooms, and that includes a computer classroom. So we're really excited about potentially being able to offer a more computer oriented and technology oriented classes like this, where maybe you could actually try some of these examples yourself, or I could like give you like, okay, find out which of these is credible, and we can actually kind of work together to see how this works. So I hope that's of interest to you, because I'm hoping at some point, as soon as we get those rooms open, which is potentially in March, hopefully it doesn't get delayed again. Material shortages and supply chain issues have definitely slowed us down, but the goal is for sometime in March, and then maybe later on down the line in spring and summer, we can actually do some more classes like this. Oh gosh, and I do have a computer privacy class coming up. So if you're interested in that, it is virtual like this. It is in March. If you're willing to bear with me, I will grab the link and just share it out. I'll share it out. You know what I'll do? I'll share it out in the email. So expect to see it in the email that I send you. And if you want to register for it, you can if you're interested in that. So it's just going to focus on more like what would you do to have more privacy and better security on your computer? How do you avoid malware? Those kind of things. Yeah, so hopefully that'll be of interest to some of you. Thank you so much for everyone bearing with me for this extra 5 minutes. I'm really glad that you were here today, and I hope to see you at the library. Bye bye. Thank you.